you there? Oh, I hear you now. Yep. Woo. All right, whoopsies. Hey there, everybody. How are we doing? All right. Hey, Andy. Welcome to the show. Welcome everyone to the Data Gods Lunch and Learns. How the heck are you doing today, sir?
I'm very well. I'm very well, thank you. I'm better than I was yesterday and the day before that because finally I broke out of my COVID funk.
Ugh.
I got it. Yeah, and I'm not gonna get the violins out or anything like that because hey, I went to a conference. You might have heard of it, SQL Bits.
Yep. More than a little jelly. I didn't make it there.
Yes, yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah.
It's awesome, and I mean, I was there for what 4 days,
Oh,
and
wow.
I probably could have done with being there for about 6 days.
Yeah.
I brought back a lot of memories
Yeah.
and a bit of COVID, so everything got shunted by a few days. But I'm fine. I'm fine, Chris, and thank you
Oh,
for
that's
inviting me on.
fantastic.
How are you?
I am kicking. I'm doing great. It's summer vacation, so that means everyone is out of the office except for me, and so I'm just covering and running the shop and everything. I mean, there's other people in the office. Just lots of vacations. You know how that goes and stuff.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. For people who are not familiar with SQL Bits, could you just give us a rundown on what it was like? What did you do there? What did you see? Any highlights you saw from the show?
Oh, great question. Well, so SQL Bits
Mm-hmm.
is it's been based in the UK,
Okay.
and it's been running for about 20 years.
Wow.
And yeah. So it's a long time, and I think the organisers do an absolutely fantastic job, to be quite honest, because I think year on year it's grown in terms of the attendees. And so now I think there was probably, well over 2,500 people at the conference. And essentially you've got 5 days. So the
Okay.
Saturday is always a free day. And
Okay.
then Thursday and Friday are paid, paid days.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the Wednesday and the Tuesday, you get these full day training days.
Mm.
So, for example, we had Lakehouse in a day by both Simon Whiteley from Advancing Analytics and Mark Price Mayer, from Microsoft. They were running a full day workshop on the Lakehouse. You had Rishi, who is a data platform MVP. He did a full day on financials within Power BI. So we're talking like 7 hours of training. I mean, obviously, my highlights are the individual sessions because there's so much to choose from. One of the problems is because there is so much to choose from that run concurrently.
Sure.
So there's like 8 different things that you can go to. So you really are spoilt for choice. Then you get the social aspect. So in the evening, there's games, there's the quiz, there's the awesome party on the Friday. But then also they've got a really good program called the Bits Buddies. So if you're new to conferences, or you're a little unsure, or you've gone on your own because you've heard about it, but you don't really know anyone, then the Bits Buddies are there to get you involved. Yeah, to sort of
that's
help.
fantastic.
Yeah, to help, because a lot of people, they like to go to conferences, but then they don't necessarily feel that comfortable in large groups of people. So it's just a way to try and welcome everyone in without putting too much pressure on everyone. So that's really good as well.
Fantastic. I don't know about you, but I like going to things like that, but I can find all of the social interactions. While I enjoy it, I find it exhausting. So anything to relieve some of that pressure sounds fabulous. That's great.
Can get tiring. It can
Yeah.
get tiring.
Well, hey, so you're new to the channel, so Andy, you want to introduce yourself? Tell the world the things you do, what you get into, that type of thing.
I'm new to being on the channel, but I'm a
Mm-hmm.
long time watcher, to
Oh,
be quite honest with you. I also really like the shorts. Yeah,
yeah.
I think the shorts are quite good because they sort of get to the get to the point on a few things. But so I've been involved with Microsoft data technology for, I keep saying 15 years, but it's probably getting closer to 20 years now.
Okay.
I can't use the excuse of 15 years anymore. So I basically encountered data warehousing around somewhere around 2003, 2004, where
Okay.
I was shown a dimensional model.
Oh, right.
And I was fascinated because I'd spent the last 2 years learning all about databases, all about normalization.
Mm. Yep.
And then I had someone basically show me a model in which you broke all of that.
Sure.
So then over the years, I've just been involved with a lot of the Microsoft technology that does that. But, I've also used a lot of other technologies like Databricks, and
Mm-hmm.
Redshift was actually my first cloud analytics system that I used at scale. Yeah, this
Okay.
was, probably 10 years ago.
Well,
When,
Redshift is that was one of the first ones that was out there that was
yeah,
truly web scale enabled, and it's a great offering.
it is.
Yeah,
It is, it is. And, Microsoft, they didn't really have anything in the space at that stage. But of course, things have changed and moved on. And in the last few years, I find myself working predominantly with Microsoft's cloud data platforms. I've been using what was called Azure SQL Data Warehouse since about 2016, which is now rolled into, Synapse as dedicated SQL pools. So really,
sure.
it's all things Azure-y, cloudy, and data-y that I work with.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's great. And one of the reasons I wanted to do this lunch and learn was specifically to start addressing that aspect of the data space, right? Like I've done a lot on the front end and the Power BI, and I think I've done lots of videos on that because that's where a lot of people start to touch data. But there's so much work, below the surface that has to go on, and things like Synapse Analytics really brings that forward and makes that a possibility. So that is fantastic.
It does. It does. Sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say, and your background, where are you specifically located?
So I'm in the UK.
Okay.
So for a bit of a joke, I couldn't afford to buy anywhere in London to live. So I
Okay.
live about half an hour on a train outside of London. And of course, now I don't actually work in an office, so I work from home. So I'm in the southeast of England in the UK.
Oh, that's fantastic. And for those of you watching, why don't you post down into the chat where you're from? All these interactions and whatnot really helps YouTube know that people are here and are enjoying the content that's going on. So the more chat we put in the in there, that really helps drive people to this. And if you have questions for Andy as we're going through this, please put it in the chat with a Q colon in front of it, and I'll jump in and I'll ask Andy that question. For example, while we don't have a Q colon on this one, I think it was Sanjay was asking, or someone I saw, what headset is that, Andy?
Well, this.
Yes.
I think these are just £20 Sony headphones.
Oh, well.
Other vendors are available, of course. Yeah, I mean, I usually would wear these big over the ear, the closed headphones.
Mm-hmm.
But all of the sort of fabrics perish, so I kind of need to get some more. But you know what? These work fine.
Sure. Yeah. Let's not spend money if we don't need to, right?
Exactly. So I haven't got the YouTube stream on at the moment just because of bandwidth. So if there are questions, Yeah, let's. I'd like this to be quite interactive and chatty. If people, if people are in the chat as well. So, Chris, just feel free, and we'll just, we'll just chat as we go along.
Fantastic. And the thing I always say is like, Andy knows this, and while I'm going to ask some questions that I don't know about, this is really for the people who are watching the live stream. So if you do have questions, we really want you to ask them. So just put those in chat, okay? So Jack, Sanjay, Kevin, Dallin, Richard, please ask away. We're happy to answer them. All right. So, well, before we go over to your desktop, this is a lunch and learn, or as Sanjay said, it's dinner and learn in India because the time's a little bit off. So I'm going to take my classical sip of my drink. Andy, I don't know if you have a beverage at hand. You can join me if you do. Although it's probably maybe not a protein shake. Oh, there we go. SQL Bits. Oh, fantastic. All right, and then we'll jump into it. But let's drink up. All right, let's head over to your desktop. Boom.
Okay, so can you see my Synapse Analytics desktop?
I can.
Good stuff.
I know. We just literally went into the home screen here, right? But can I say I just love how this is laid out, and it draws you down the path to work with stuff, right? Like ingest it, explore it, visualize it. I'm a big fan of this layout and how they have this set up.
And it's a good point.
Yeah.
And the other point is that they haven't mucked about with it and changed it.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much what you see here is what was available 3.5 years ago. Because one of the things that it's not that I don't like things moving around, but when you come into something like Synapse Studio, home, data, develop, integrate, monitor, manage on the left-hand side, they pretty much remained untouched, which is when we're in this world now of constant need for change, for constant updates. So, for example, we have Power BI. We have a monthly update. Everyone is waiting on tenterhooks to see what new features are being added to Power BI. It's almost become like that with Synapse. Every month we have a Synapse update. We've got new features. We've got things that get rolled in every month. And yeah, you need to keep track of that. But it's also good that the interface still looks as fresh now as it did, 3.5 years ago, and it hasn't changed. Which I like that from a consistency perspective, right?
Right. I mean, there's, and I was talking about this yesterday, the whole concept of Who Moved My Cheese. Andy, have you ever read or seen that book, Who Moved My Cheese?
No. What is it?
It was released. I was really schooled on this because the book was released in 1998, and all of the people I was talking to yesterday, well, not all of them, but like 80% of them were born after the book was released. So I was really put in my place. But it was one of the first books out there to really start to address, like, hey, change control and getting used to new things and adjusting is something that we need to become aware of and be okay with, right? Because prior to that, things were just like how do you do accounting? Well, we've been doing it like this for 2,000 years. So how do you do butchering or manufacturing, right? There were these stated processes that have been in place for decades or hundreds, if not thousands of years. And technology was starting to come along and say, hey, there's this new software out, and not only are we going to release, you're going to work on a computer that's totally different than pencil and paper, but now that software is going to update every 3 or 4 years, right? And that was mind-boggling and scary to people, and it was something that was a big sea change, and we got used to it. We were able to overcome and do that, but that came along with the price, and I think that price was always having to have this never shifting or ever shifting space. And to your point, it's very comforting to see some pieces of it stay solid, and then it's the details inside of it that change.
Exactly. And what you were saying about 3 or 4 years, it feels like it's almost like 3 or 4 days where, something can change. But
Agreed.
also, I have lots of discussions around, the choice of technology platform and things like that. And I think there's a lot. I'm not saying it's like easy, but it's slightly easier now to change platforms. Now we've got this whole concept of separated storage, separated data, and separated compute, that we can kind of mix and match and change things if we feel that the solution we've got isn't offering the value that we need.
Yeah.
So things, so the rate of change, it's kind of seeped into how we implement technology as well.
I completely agree. Yeah, and we're now, the nice thing is, to me, what that means is we get to choose the best solutions to meet our given needs at any point, and we can change them seamlessly, right? So, like Sanjay's talking about how much when it comes to like installing libraries is a bit of a pain inside of Synapse. It's easier in Databricks. Well, that's fine, right? You can use Databricks inside of this environment. Your storage is still going to be the same. You can still store it in Parquet files, right, or whatever it happens to be, and then you use the other tooling, right? So it's a very different world now.
Yeah, well, Sanjay, we'll get into the Power BI integration in Synapse in a moment.
Mm-hmm.
But Sanjay makes a very good point: is that one of the issues that Microsoft has with Synapse is that they use open source Spark, they use open source Delta. The cadence of getting those releases into Synapse is better; it's shorter, but they're still constrained by the fact that they've got to take this open source technology. They've got to then go through it, test it, make sure that it's robust enough to put into their flagship analytics and data warehouse product. They can't take risks, right?
Right.
If, Spark 3.4, for example, is hot off the press and Microsoft just drop it in and let people work with it in Synapse, there could be a fundamental problem with it. So it's always going to lag a little bit behind. If you look at Databricks, obviously they're contributing to Spark, they're contributing to Delta. So some of the things are going to be more beneficial to use in Databricks. But of course, you can use Azure Databricks to do, your heavy data engineering. But yeah, it's also about ecosystems and about infrastructure. You can take, if you were to, and our friend Mim on Twitter, who does all of the testing of all of the cloud data platforms you can ever want to look at, does a really good job of testing all of the vendors, all of their offerings, and offering a very honest analysis of that. Yeah. But if you then were to try and put together some kind of coherent data strategy and architecture, and you were trying to stitch together all of the best-in-class services from all the vendors, could get quite complicated.
Mm-hmm.
There are always some compromises, right?
Yep.
Always some compromises in, an overall architecture. Right. So, shall we jump into some Power BI and Synapse?
Yes. Yeah. Sorry, yes. Let's get into it. Yeah.
See, I could talk about the why for about an hour.
Right.
But, so we're going to cover Power BI and Synapse, and I think I say this before any session that I do with Power BI and Synapse, is that if you see a talk, a YouTube video, a session, a blog, and it says Power BI and Synapse, read it, watch it, go to it. It's not going to be the same session, honestly. It's going to be different content. People are concentrating on the architectural side of things. People are concentrating on how those two services work together from an ecosystem perspective. I like to dive into features. I like to actually dive into some code and look at how they work together. So what I would say is that all these sessions are not, they are different. Yeah,
They're
so
not created equal. Are you saying? Is that what you're saying?
exactly. Go and watch them all. Go and watch as many as you can.
Well, and fantastic. And Andy, now you post all the time. You've got a YouTube channel too, right?
I do. Yeah, it's Data High BI. The cadence of the videos are probably once a month. I like the written word.
Okay.
Because my reasons for blogging is around, building that sort of body of knowledge, of content.
Sure.
But then I had someone saying, it was quite funny actually. I had an email to say, I really like your blogs, but I can't be bothered to read. So can you make some videos? So I started to, put some lights and started to do some YouTube videos. What I will be doing over the next few weeks is diving into some specific features in Power BI and Synapse as well. So some deep dives into how the two services work together. So so look out for those coming soon.
Fantastic.
So what we're going to do is we're going to link up Power BI with Synapse Analytics, because we can actually work with Power BI in Synapse. And then after we've done this, we'll have a couple of minutes and just have a little chat about why we might want to do this. That's the crux of this. So within Synapse, so within our workspace, we've got the concept of linked services. Now, linked services are all the connections to all our other data services. So SQL databases, on-premise SQL servers, data lakes, SaaS providers. One of those linked services is actually Power BI. So if we create a linked service, usually what you get, and I do find this quite funny, is you'll get almost like a marketing banner marquee to say, hey, you know what? You can connect to Power BI. We can, of course, just search for Power BI and it's going to be there.
It reminds me of like single reports in your area want to connect with you. So
yeah. Single Power BI capacities want to connect in your area. So one thing to note is that this isn't just a premium feature. If you're just running Pro and you've got no premium capacity, this will work for you. So you can connect Pro workspaces as well. So we've got a pre-configured Kratos BI workspace in Power BI that I've created. We've got all our tenants that we can choose from, and we should be able to find Kratos BI. Now I can attach as many Power BI workspaces to my Synapse instance. I don't think there's an upper limit. If it is, I've got the number 20 rolling around my head.
Okay. All right.
I'll check that. However, there was a limitation that you could only attach one workspace, which wasn't particularly useful. Now you can attach many workspaces, which will appear in your linked services.
Okay, so there is a finite number, but
there may be.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd have to check that. But you've got the ability to connect multiple workspaces into Synapse Studio. And that's going to appear under your Develop tab.
Okay.
So all of my artifacts are all available in the Develop. So all my SQL scripts, all my Data Explorer scripts, KQL, my Spark notebooks, my data flows, and my Power BI workspaces. So from here, the only artifacts that you'll see is data sets and reports. So you're not going to see dashboards. You're not going to see any other artifacts in here as well. I tell you what, I'd love data mart, because I'd love to be able to build a data mart in here from what I'm connecting to in Synapse. We'll have when we have a little look at data marts later on. one of the reasons for using data marts is the size of the data, but we'll get onto that later on.
But
ultimately,
you could use this to connect to a SQL server, though, right? Or like a managed instance, or
so if you were using linked services, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So essentially, if we were going into our manage and we were going to create a linked service, we could say, right, new, we're going to connect to whatever data source that we need to connect to. So look, you've got SQL database managed instance. You've got Azure SQL databases. So essentially, with in Synapse, you're sort of casting your net out to all your data sources that you want to connect to.
Gotcha. Cool. But you'd like it to be the Power BI data mart would be helpful if it could surface here, right?
If you saw a little folder that said data marts and you could have a button that said click to create a data mart, and it would automatically connect to your Synapse resources that you had, for example, your dedicated SQL pools, your serverless SQL pools that you had available, and then do what you do in Power BI in terms of creating your data mart. But at the moment, we've got data sets and we've got reports. So I've got some existing data sets in there already. So we've got a report that I uploaded, which is basically a dedicated SQL pools query report.
Okay.
I've also got 2 data sets that have been automatically created from data marts that I've created. Yeah.
Okay.
So the data sets are going to show up in there. So I can go ahead and just click create a report. Right. So I'm going to sort of hide that. And of course, what we're going to have, well, one of my favorite buttons in Synapse Studio is the top right. So what I'll do is let me get Zoom it running. Is up here.
Oh yes.
The tiniest of little arrows in the top right of Studio, but it just gives us a full. It gives us a full screen. Yeah, gives us a full screen, and then what we're going to be able to do is we're going to be able to create a report. As per whatever we need. I mean, let me just very quickly just create a table. It's not going to mean much, right? But there we go.
Right.
And if I save it, then I'm going to, dedicated analysis. Okay, so there's my report. Let's just come back down there. And I can see that. Yeah, I can see the report. If we go to the Power BI workspace itself, then there's my report. Yeah. So it's not exclusive to Synapse Analytics. Yeah. You're just exposing some of those objects within Power BI itself.
So you could do all. Let me just summarize. So you're saying I could do, as if I'm like a data engineer and I need to build some reports, I could do all my data engineering in here. And then, like, if I needed to build a report, like on my pipeline processing or something along those lines, I can then just put it into Power BI from all in Synapse, right? I don't have to leave here, and then make that available and share that out. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Yes. So actually, we'll have the conversation that I wanted to have after I went through this, whilst we'll do the next bit of the demo, because we've spoken about this before. We've been involved in conversations about this. Analytics engineering.
Yes.
Yeah. This space in between data engineering and being a data analyst, where you're not really responsible for building visualizations, because that in itself is an art form, right? Telling a story with data. I'm not very good at the visualization side of things. I'll hold my hands up and say I need to get better. But with the analytics engineering side of things, you've got this middle ground between the data engineering side and the analyst side. What's in the middle? Modeling. Yep, that world of creating a Power BI model that you are taking from the source data, a data warehouse, for example, or data in a data lake, modeling it to then allow people to report from it. So from here, if I'm in my Power BI workspace, in my data sets, I get an option to basically create a new data set. So I've got a new Power BI data set. So from here, it's not doing anything in terms of web authoring. So this is, this is something to note. Love to have it, but what you will need is desktop. You'll need Power BI desktop to do the authoring.
Okay.
But what you get access to is you get access to both the dedicated SQL pools and the serverless SQL pools. So you will see those in the list of databases. Really, so I'll connect to my dedicated SQL pool. Now, for some reason, I don't know whether it's my browser, but it's not highlighting the fact that I've clicked my data warehouse up here. However, there we go. So DH data warehouse. What it's going to do is it's going to download a definition file. So, we've got all these types of files in Power BI. We've got, so I'm team PBIX. I now say PBIX.
All right.
I've picked a side. I'm now PBIX, which contains everything. It contains the model definition, the data, the report definition, all in one. We've got the pbit, which is a template file, and actually I normally create a model or a report in Power BI. I'll export it as a pbit, and I'll source control that in DevOps. This gives you a pbids, which is a Power BI file which has the data source embedded in it. So it's something like if you had pbids files, let's say in an area in SharePoint that people had access to, right? They could click that pbids file, it would download, it would open up desktop and connect to the pre-approved data source that you wanted them to connect to. It's the same here. Yeah. So we're going to download the pbids, open up desktop, and we're going to automatically connect to whichever database that we have. Now we've got to have access to it, right? And probably
Does this allow you to embed credentials or no?
So it's going to be based on the RBAC permissions within serverless SQL pools. I would say if you didn't have permission, that database may not appear.
Okay.
If it does appear and you don't have permissions, it'll prompt you for the credentials to be able to access that database.
Okay.
But there we go. It's as if I've just connected to it from desktop itself. So it's not doing anything particularly clever. It's just a shortcut. Yeah. So if I then...
And what a shortcut if you work in a large organization where you have to communicate out where do people to go to access this stuff versus like, hey, here's the 45 steps to like authentic, to select this and authentic. Like, this is awesome.
To funnel the right role into the right area. Yes. Yeah, I totally agree. Because then, if you were an analytics engineer and you were responsible for creating the models that were based on already pre-engineered models in Synapse, then if you had your appropriate roles and permissions within Synapse Studio to be able to go in, not just use the Power BI integrated mechanism, but also to run queries against, run ad hoc queries against the various SQL pools, but then maybe you don't have permission in all of the various workspaces in the service itself. You've just got permissions to be able to build the models. But ultimately, we've got our desktop model that we all know and love. And if we publish, I'm not going to publish up to the workspace, but ultimately what will happen is you can just then choose the workspace to publish to. And of course, the one that you really want to publish to is the workspace that you've got connected to in Synapse. And then you can come back into Synapse if you then so desired and see the reports and work on the reports, embedded within Synapse Studio as if you were in the service. But the crux is that you have that data set saved, locally in Power BI Desktop.
Right. And the reason why they're having you launch the desktop is to get the full modeling experience, because we don't currently have a full modeling experience on the web, right?
No, we don't.
Okay.
However, what I would like, we do have data mart modeling in the web.
Yes.
So that's, one of the things that I would really, really like to see is integration, with data marts in there. So I think that's probably a good point to quickly segue into data marts just for a couple of minutes, just for a few minutes. It's more about understanding where data marts are useful. And Chris, this is where, and people in the chat can sort of jump in as well. This is all based on my opinion. So it's one of these things where I've started to look at using data marts because I don't see it as an issue. But let me jump into Power BI. Okay, so in my Kratos BI workspace that I have created, yes, it is attached to a premium capacity. It's a premium per user capacity. And I've created a data mart. Why? Why have I created a data mart? Why would I need to create a data mart? When you're working with Power BI and when you're working with Synapse, I'll just create, I'll just click on the model view. Yeah, so we're probably not going to go into too much detail here, right? I've got my star schema. Yeah, so I've got my fact table and I've got my dimensions. For me, Power BI and Synapse are almost at two ends of the scale. On the Synapse side, really this is for large scale data analysis. There are some really good talks around using Synapse for small data sets, usually using something like serverless SQL pools, which is a really, really cost-effective, lightweight engine where you can pretty much bring any data volume size.
Yep.
But it is ostensibly a large data processing engine, so it likes crunching large volumes of data. That's what the engine is for. You also have dedicated SQL pools, which is for large scale relational data warehousing, within a sort of a massively parallel processing architecture.
Right.
The crux is that it's a large data set. It's a large amount of data. And then on the Power BI side, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, you've done a lot of stuff with Power BI Gen 2, but as I understand it, you do have an upper footprint limit of 100 terabytes of data in Power BI.
Well,
and it,
yeah, technically,
something like that, shared across data sets, data flows, data marts. I think data marts, each one is a currently 100 gig limit or something like that. So you've got these sides of the data coin. Usually when I build a Power BI data set, yes, I know that I can enable large data set format in Power BI. in a workspace, and then
Mhm.
that data set can just grow and grow and grow and grow and grow. But it makes me a little panicky if a data set starts to grow very big. This is where I have appreciated where Power BI data marts come into it, because all of a sudden we've got this intermediate storage mechanism for data that we're getting from our Synapse environment that could be into the tens of
Mm.
terabytes.
Mm.
Yeah,
Right.
we're using, so, we've got the familiar Power Query interface where we can, group by, aggregate, maybe bring the granularity of the data in our Synapse systems to a slightly higher granularity to reduce the data set, but it's still quite a large footprint of data that we have to manage within our data sets. And I think data marts provide a very good middle ground between those technologies. We can set up incremental refresh. Yeah,
Right.
we can only go and get the most recent data that we need from our fact tables. We can reprocess the dimension tables. A data mart that I'm using at the moment has, probably 150 million fact rows. Not that many. You could probably just about manage it in a data set. Quite wide dimensions, everything like that. It's a good few gig in a data set.
Right.
But in a data mart, it refreshes in next to no time, and then we've got some small data sets off that, which is, hits the sweet spot. So I just wanted to talk very, very quickly about the use case of data marts when connecting to Synapse. And the other thing with Synapse is you might have all of your different business areas in a single dedicated SQL pool or across multiple serverless SQL pools databases. And of course, with data marts, we can create these subject area focused repositories.
Well, and actually, that's a great question, and I think Donald Parrish is asking this in the chat. He's asking like, how big is justifies a Synapse versus just doing a data mart or just doing a SQL server, right? What size do you think is the appropriate size? And
You know what?
I'm going to give my answer after you give yours.
Yeah. So from my own personal experiences, I've never used dedicated under around 4 or 5 terabytes.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's 4 or 5 terabytes of data being compressed in the column store index, in Vertipack. And it's usually at the lowest level of granularity as well.
Mm-hmm.
So some of the data sets in Power BI that I've been using are at the lowest level of granularity, the transactional rows. But obviously, if that source data set is quite large, then you kind of want to remove some of that granularity if data sets in Power BI are growing too big. But of course, I'm not saying it's kind of a finger in the air, but if you've got a dedicated SQL pool sat there, or you've got a whole bunch of data in your data lake that you've cast some structure over with serverless, and it's into the terabytes and it's into the billions of rows, then possibly the data mart could be that intermediate store between a data set where you're just reducing that granularity a little bit.
Yeah, and
and
I'm gonna my take is that you're right. You're 100% right. It's like 4 to 5 terabytes, but I would contend that every organization has 4 to 5 terabytes of data, or should have 4 to 5 terabytes of data, if they're properly managing and pulling in data, getting a raw layer of data that they've snapshotted, and all this stuff that it goes to data engineering. So I think almost any company should consider having a Synapse space for the enterprise. But it's the smaller working teams that are either outside or even within the IT area where they need focus, like you're saying, like, okay, maybe we as an enterprise manage all of our data inside of Synapse, because then we can do everything, and we can have serverless, and we can have dedicated, and I think they said to stop using dedicated. I heard someone say we're not supposed to use dedicated anymore, but well, they brand it. But then it's the data mart comes in at that team level to say like, okay, hey, do something with it that is more aggregated. Maybe you don't need to have, all of the stuff that's in Synapse. I think it's a perfect way to talk about that.
And of course, Synapse as a product, evolves. I think one of the main issues that people have with dedicated is that we've not seen the feature enhancements in dedicated that a lot of people would like to see, myself included. However, in terms of bang for your buck, you look at something like SQL database, Azure SQL database. You look at something like VMs in Azure, and then you look at dedicated and the amount of memory that you can get. You can get quite a lot for your money in dedicated if you price it right. One of the biggest things that I always hear about is dedicated, is expensive. Well, if you're using pay as you go, then yeah, it's at scale, it's going to get quite expensive. But through reserved pricing, for a year or 3 years, then it's going to bring that down. And hey, if you're looking at implementing dedicated SQL pools, look, doing it, how often are you going to be changing your large scale data analytics platform? I did say about changing things frequently. 3 years, probably a good finger in the air in terms of like changing things. And of course, if you pre-purchase dedicated over 3 years, you can get it for a third of the price.
Right. Yeah? And I think the other side is when we're talking about a cloud scale data warehousing solution, the price is honestly, when I've done a detailed deep dive into Redshift, Snowflake, Databricks, and Synapse, and that was exactly where it was the highest. Like Redshift was 4 times the price of Synapse. Snowflake and Databricks were around almost double on both of those, and then there was the Synapse for the same amount of computing and performance. So I mean,
the thing is though, with pricing, any one of those can be cheaper than the other.
Right. Yep. All depending how you scale it and
given the right optimizations. Any one of those can be cheaper than the others. So Snowflake, for example, Snowflake is a great platform. But what a lot of people forget in Snowflake, it's got different tiers and different editions, and you don't productionize Snowflake at its most basic tier. You have to productionize Snowflake at its, I don't know I can't remember whether it's an enterprise tier, but where it has disaster recovery, where it has those enterprise features, in there as well.
Yep.
But yeah, just to dive very quickly into some of the things within dedicated SQL pools to look at when you're using Power BI with it. So dedicated has this concept of concurrency. So it has limits to how many queries can be run at a certain time when multiple queries are being run. A user will get assigned to a specific can be assigned to a specific resource class, and that resource class gets a certain amount of resources on dedicated. And what you can actually do is with one dedicated SQL pool, you could almost create it like multiple clusters with this concept of a workload group. So, for example, you could create 3 workload groups and say, well, workload group 1 is all about ad hoc analysis. Workload group 2 is all about ETL or ELT operations. And then the third workload group is all about refreshing, data sets from Power BI or Analysis Services Tabular, something like that. And none of those will cross over. You will get the resources from each of those workload groups. So, for example, if you run your dedicated at DWU 1000, that gives you 600 gig of RAM. If you were to split those workload groups exactly evenly for a third, they're going to get 200 gig of RAM. Yeah, it's not going to bleed into anyone's resources. So you can sort of, split apart that dedicated SQL pool. But one of the things that I wanted to show, so I'm just going to jump back into Synapse Studio.
Please.
Is on dedicated SQL pools. So I'm just going to choose that. We probably won't get any requests, or if they are, they're probably a little bit old, yeah, apart from my request. But if I go into a report, and basically I've got a set of dimension tables and a fact table that I've connected to in my dedicated SQL pool. Obviously, if that fact table is really large in my dedicated SQL pool, I might want to, either group by in Power BI or create a view to reduce the granularity in there. But ultimately, I've got a set of tables, and if I hit refresh, I'm probably not going to bother waiting for the refresh to complete. But whilst it's connected to dedicated SQL pools, I'm going to go back and run my query. So sys.dmpdw exec requests is your friend. It'll tell you everything that's going on in terms of queries being executed against your dedicated SQL pool. If I bring this up, you can basically see I've got queries running. Yep, so select tables, such and such. Most important thing in dedicated SQL pools, for me at least, is understanding when each SQL query hits dedicated, how much resource is it actually taking up? So we've got this column called resource allocation percentage, 12.5, 12.5%. Yeah, so this one query has been allocated 12.5% of the entire dedicated SQL pool resource. I am running this dedicated at a really, really low DWU. And the user that Power BI is connecting to dedicated is set to like the lowest, the smallest amount of resource available. But we can still see that we've got some resources that are being used up when Power BI is connecting to dedicated. Yep. So look, you can see here that the customer, the one of the tables that we loaded from, it actually used some of the dedicated resource whilst it was running. However, the others we got from the cache. Yep. So an important concept in dedicated SQL pools is what's called result set caching. Yep. So this is the ability for dedicated to serve up the requested data, but just from its cache. Not the most groundbreaking thing in the world. Yeah, systems have had caches for many years. If things haven't changed, why would you have to go back to the source data? Have to, get all that data, join it all together, and then report it back to the SQL client when you can report that from the cache. But in this world, what we can do is, if we've run a query previously and the data in the underlying table hasn't changed, or the schema of that table hasn't changed, it'll cache it. When you get a request in, and if it can be served from the cache, it'll report it from the cache. Now with Power BI, I know we can get clever and we can only specify certain tables to be refreshed. But of course, that's, there's some additional overhead there in getting all that set up. But if you're using dedicated and you've got the ability to maybe modify how you're working with the data. So what I mean by that is sometimes when you're creating a contract between Power BI and the database, you use views, right? You don't connect to the source table. Good practice is creating views. Maybe some of those views that you're creating have some non-deterministic functions in there. Things like get date, scalar, things that it won't be able to get it from the cache. So I always sort of advocate, looking at the queries if the data hasn't changed, then there's no point going to the source data and having to reconstruct it, because there is some overhead in terms of dedicated doing that and bringing that back. So I wanted to point that out in dedicated in terms of resource allocation percentage and the results, the sort of caching hit there.
That's an excellent point, because you talk with, like as a consultant, you talk with people who have Snowflake and have other tools that are out there, and they say, hey, why should I, over here, I've got these free cached results that come back nearly instantaneously. They have no costs associated with them. Can you do that on Synapse side? And it's clear you can here.
Yes, and most important thing is they do not count towards the resource allocation. Yeah, so it doesn't count to anything to do with concurrency. So that query will just go and be returned, even if the whole system is 100% busy at the moment. So that's a win, really, in terms of getting the data back from dedicated.
Agreed.
However, we've got another SQL pool that we can get data from, which is serverless. Yeah. So I just think for the last few minutes, it's having a very, very quick look at serverless. Now, one of the things that Synapse and Power BI have been championed recently is the whole lakehouse architecture. Now, I know you had Johnny Winter, Grayskull Analytics, a little while ago on the Kratos BI channel talking about the lakehouse, right?
Right. Yes.
And of course, Synapse, plays, a role in that as well. And
but just to recap, for the people who didn't see that, lakehouse architecture is we have our structured data warehouse data that's stored in like Parquet files, and it is like structured data. But then we also have in that same space like unstructured data that we use for our data and analytics and curating stuff. So they call it a lakehouse. It's a combination of the two.
Is that correct? Yeah. Literally awesome. The portmanteau. All of that nice stuff in the data warehousing world, like transactional consistency and schema enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
And then over here we've got the data lake with all its different data types. Its its ability to scale, bringing those two together, and ultimately, it's about the separation of compute and storage. So file formats like Delta, like Iceberg and Hudi can all just be moved between vendors that, well, ultimately the vendor still has to support reading and writing those formats, but right. You can essentially take your data elsewhere. So for example, in the world of Azure, we can use Databricks. We can use Databricks to do our data engineering, land it into a format like Delta, and then use something like serverless to just query that on demand. So, as an example, we've got some CSV data, which is not really the best format to be working with in terms of reporting on, let's say, the serverless SQL side. And ultimately, we can save that data to the Delta format. Yeah, we can save that to one of these lakehouse file formats, which supports transactional consistency. It supports being able to advance the schema as well as, or evolve the schema, as well as making sure that we're not going to insert any data into any invalid columns, anything like that. And ultimately, we can surface that using these objects called lake databases, which serverless can read. Now, lake databases versus serverless databases are, a session in and of themselves. Yeah. But I know. Think of lake databases very much on the Spark side of things, whereas serverless SQL pools databases, although they can read lake databases, you can forego any of the Spark workloads and just use serverless SQL pools databases over data in the data lake. And then I think the last thing is, so from a serverless perspective, for example, I'll open up the incremental refresh because just like, sorry, Chris, you were saying?
I was just gonna like reframe. So what you have here is a model that connects back to a serverless Synapse analytics environment, right? And you have set up incremental refreshes on the data set. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. So what I wanted to show is if I go into monitor my SQL requests, I think my oh, we've got a problem with
Web view.
Let's try opening up that Power BI file again.
Turn off the infrastructure update.
But
I feel bad for whoever's trying to manage the WebView 2 thing or dealing with that. That's been.
It is. It's. I think for a lot of people, it's been. There's been some contention there in terms of in terms of using it. But anyway, the crux is that yes, Azure SQL database, SQL Server, dedicated SQL pools, you are essentially dealing with data that's been imported into their own constructs, right? Into their own storage systems. Serverless has no concept of that. However, we've still got T-SQL syntax that we can use to be able to connect Power BI to serverless, which ultimately is connecting to the data lake. You know, so if we are doing data engineering, if we are landing our data into a data lake using that, you know, that medallion architecture, you know, where we've got our bronze, our raw data, our silver cleansed, and our gold aggregated, or our dimensional models. If we use serverless in between, Power BI doesn't really care. It just sees it as a SQL engine. And what we can do is, if I just bring up transform data, is, you know, I've connected, let me just bring up the advanced editor and just expand this a little bit. Okay. So I've just connected to server. I've just connected to the serverless endpoint. You know, I've got a database that I've created, and I created a view over the data in the data lake. Now that data is partitioned, and what I've done is I've exposed the partition column in the view. The upshot is I can then just use Power BI's incremental refresh process as if it was any database. Yeah. So if we've got data that's being landed into our data lake on an hourly basis or a daily basis, we can use incremental refresh. We can use the hybrid table functionality. So only go and refresh that data, because while it's refreshing its preview, and I think the last thing that I'll show is if we go back to Synapse Studio, in the monitor tab, in our SQL requests, this is where we can see all of those requests hitting our SQL pools. We've got the built-in pool, right? That's the serverless SQL pool.
Okay.
Yeah. So whenever you see built-in in Synapse, that's the SQL pool that's the serverless SQL pool. You only get one. There's only one built-in engine that we're using.
Okay.
But as you can see, we've got our requests. Yeah. It's the data processed. That is the most important metric in serverless SQL pools, because that's how you're being charged. Yeah.
Okay.
The megabytes there turns into money. Yeah. So Something
gotcha.
like incremental refresh, when you're setting it up to only load, certain partitions of data from your data lake, is doing two things. It's number one, it's speeding up processing because you're not having to go back and reload all that data. But number two, it's costing you less as well because you're only going to go and get that little snapshot of data from the previous day, for example.
Right. Okay. Well, and yeah, that makes great sense if you want to, because serverless, you're paying for the SIP, right? And so you, or in some of these cases, the gulp, right? These, none of these are terribly big, but you have a few gig ones. Those are much bigger than your 19 megabyte loads,
Oh well,
right?
if we scroll down, there you go. There's 1.14 gig.
Mm-hmm.
1.5 gig, 1.5 gig. It all adds up.
Right.
6 gig,
Ooh.
62 gig.
Right.
There we go. 55 gig. Yeah. There's been some processing there that's really hitting that hard.
Yeah.
So that'll add up. And which is why one of the sort of last things that I want to sort of say on the subject of Power BI and serverless is direct query. Use at your peril.
Right.
Both from a performance perspective, because ultimately serverless is not an interactive BI engine.
Right.
It's not going to get you the results in
that you're
milliseconds.
thinking that you're going to.
Yeah, exactly. It's
but
not
that is
going to
something,
cache anything.
So if you're going to set up, you'd be talking dedicated for direct query versus serverless and without, right?
And again, with direct query and dedicated, you still have to be careful about concurrency.
Oh,
yeah.
Yep.
So really the only use case that I've seen direct query and dedicated is aggregations.
Yep.
Very, very, very carefully curated aggregations, and certainly not automatic aggregations. Very useful feature, automatic aggregations.
Sure.
Set them up, see what's being aggregated. You need to use log analytics to investigate what's actually being what queries are actually being cached, and then just create manual aggregations based on that. But it's really the only use case that I've seen for direct query, because with dedicated you have the concept of concurrency. So either you set your parallel execution within Power BI desktop to a certain number of concurrent queries that can be run, or your system is just going to get flooded with as many SQL queries as Power BI is going to send down.
Sure. Well, hey Andy, this is fantastic. I hope for those of you who are in the chat, a lot of great questions, a lot of good back and forth. I hope this really helped clarify how you could use both Synapse dedicated and serverless to offer up information into your Power BI analytics space, and why, like Andy brought up at the start, this starts to get into the analytics engineering aspect of the world, right? So as you start to do more in the analytics space, and I think Darren was asking about this before, like, hey, should I be going into this? If you find yourself saying, I need more than just what's in the Power BI service, this is that next step. And as Andy showed, these are just, you can start to do baby steps into this and have some impact, right? Be able to use these new tools to get these up and running.
Start with serverless.
Yes.
Yeah, and scale up as necessary. And the other thing is, Synapse can be a solution looking for a problem, if you see what I mean. It can be a sledgehammer. Yeah, it has its place, but only in the right, scenarios.
Right. I think I agree. And yeah, enterprise, Synapse. Data team or analytics team, that's when you start to say, okay, like when you use what you need, right? Have the appropriate tools for the right job, right? And maybe that's just Power BI, or it's Power BI and data marts, or it's Power BI, data marts, and serverless pools, or something along those lines. But
yeah.
This has been a fantastic conversation, Andy. Clearly, me and you are cut from the same cloth. I'd ask you like where your mother is from because it feels like we have a kinship here on this topic.
Oh,
I absolutely love this. Um, so Andy, thank you so much for doing this demo, walking us through how you can use this. This is fantastic. Any parting words for everybody online?
say again.
Any parting words or last tips for all of our viewers?
Well, I mean, yeah. Firstly, thank you for inviting me on the channel. You know, it's been really good. The other thing, you know, I'm on Twitter. You know, Mr. Andy Cutler. Reach out. You know, I love a good conversation about all of this. I will. And the funny thing is, I spend as much time not selling Synapse as I do selling it, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
I only ever really want to see this used in the right scenario and the right place. So again, you know, any questions about it, feel free to reach out. Honestly, feel free.
Well, and you have something about the 500 level course you're doing, yes?
The DP500.
Yes,
Yes.
DP500.
Yes. So that's you know, this fits this space absolutely perfectly. And it's generated quite a lot of interest because you've got people on the data engineering side sort of interested in the Power BI side, and people on the Power BI side interested in the Synapse and Purview, which is you know, Microsoft's data governance solution as well. So yeah, I mean, me and Nicola Illich, Data Mozart, you know, we have been doing our sort of DP500 exam sessions. You know, we've done it, you know, a handful of times. We've got night or day 2 of our 3-hour exam cram tomorrow.
Okay.
Tomorrow evening. I think it's, you know, sort of 5:30. You know, British summertime. They will all be available. So I think the full, you know, it's probably going to be about 3 hours. It's going to be available on a Data Weekender YouTube channel at some stage. So I'll let everyone know about that. But yeah, you know, if you haven't heard of the DP500 certification, have a look for it. You know, it really does sit in between the data engineering and the data analyst worlds. You're not expected to know any heavy data engineering in the world of Synapse. So, you know, nothing about pipelines or Spark or anything like that. Just how to use the SQL pools and which SQL pools to use, you know, in which scenarios. And then on the Power BI side, again, you're not really going to have to know anything hardcore in terms of DAX. I don't even think I had a DAX question in my exam, but it's, again, it sits in that space, that analytics engineering space.
Sure.
Really interesting exam, touches a lot of roles as well. So yeah, definitely check it out.
Awesome. Well, Andy, thank you so much. Everyone in chat, thank you guys so much. I really enjoyed these Wednesdays. I love getting to connect with everyone out there. Please do hit up Mr. Andy Cutler on Twitter, or keep in touch with me on Twitter, LinkedIn, all that good stuff. We're both on both platforms, but either way, hit us up. Let us know if you have any questions. Love to keep this conversation going, either on social media or down in the chat below. Thank you guys so much. Peace. Baker Tilly Digital combines strategic industry insight and advanced technical expertise to uncover and solve your digital transformation challenges. If you're interested in learning more, check out our website at bakertilly.com/digital.